Hello and welcome to All You Can Board. My name is Carlo and today I'm counting down my top 10 games of 2021. Finally, if you're wondering why it is this late in the year, well, I talk about that and some other stuff about why I put together this list in the way I did in a prior video. And what I mean by that is this is a second video in a two-part series. The first video I did was tier ranking the 68 games that I played from 2021. So in that video, I kind of go into putting into tiers the other 58 games that are outside of my top 10, and I kind of ran through and said a couple quick things about each of those games and why they belonged in the tiers they did. And now today, obviously, I'm just going over the top 10, and I'm going to tell you why these were so good and why these were the standout 10 titles for me. And that's the most key part, is it for me. So this is not an objective list. I'm not saying that for anyone out there, these should be the 10 games that stand out to you. But by doing this, right after a tier list, hopefully this gives you a big body of 68 games that I've shared my opinion on. You can compare these two and see if there's games that were at the bottom of my tier list that you really like. Well, then maybe you disagree with my opinion and you can disregard these games, or maybe you tend to agree with me when you have watched our videos, and so maybe these will stand out to you more for that reason. So without further ado, let's get into it, starting with the number 10 game of the year, which obviously just snuck into the list here, and that is Cryo. This is a sci-fi themed worker placement game for 2 to 4 players. It's co-designed by Luke Laurie and Tom Jolly and published by Z-Man Games, I believe it is. Yes, Z-Man Games. So yeah, this takes about, it says in the box 60 to 90 minutes. I think the first time I played with a full teach and all 4 players being new was probably closer to the 2-hour mark, but still fairly snappy for this level of worker placement game. So the basic idea is that your ship crash lands on a very cold planet and you are competing with the other players to race to find underground caverns where you can put your crew members in cryogenic chambers to keep them alive. So this is a very cutthroat, mean game. It's one of the simplest worker placement games that still gives you a lot of decisions, a lot of weight to what you're doing in the game. It can feel pretty unforgiving because you're doing things like sabotaging other people's crew members who are still in their chambers before they actually get transported to the underground caverns. You've got a little area majority game that you're playing for the caverns when you drop your crew members off, so you're scoring points if you have the most crew members in a particular cavern, but only a couple of the caverns are revealed at the start, and you have to get these vehicle cards to actually go deeper and deeper in and explore the caverns and see what's there and which caverns are going to be worth the most points or which ones require certain resources you might have. Very cool. And you have on your own player board, your workers are these drones, and what you do is on your turn you're either placing a drone on the board or you're taking a recall action, which is to take back all of your drones that are on worker placement spots. And when you pull them back onto your board, they go to these little customizable slots where you have upgrades, and depending which slot you put the drone back on, it's going to trigger an upgrade. But you're gaining tokens throughout the game to slide into those slots, so you choose what happens when you pull those drones back. Plenty of other cool stuff. I won't get more into it, but it's got a very streamlined rule set. It's probably probably like 6-7 pages of rules, multi-use cards. It's just one of those games that feels like it has seen a ton of really finely edited kind of development work. Like this isn't by no means a 10 out of 10 game. It's not like one of my absolute favorite worker placement games, but to have one that's a more entry level game that I can show people that's still very interactive, very cutthroat, and has this simple of a rule set, I think it's a fantastic game, and I think it was overlooked because of the relatively high price point. I think it's about $65 or $70, but this game has really, really nice components, really nice artwork, just great table presence. Everyone I've shown it to has really enjoyed it. So yeah, it's a really, really good game. I would highly recommend you try it out if you're into this sort of thing. That is Cryo. All right, on to my number 9 game of the year, which is Café. So this is co-designed by, is it Raleigh Costa, I think? Yes, published by Pythagoras. So this is they're a company located in Portugal. And I've talked about this on the channel a few times already. I actually covered this in an Own It, Play It, or Skip It, so I won't get too into it here, but it's basically a little tableau building, engine building game where you play over 8 rounds and you're going through the process of coffee production. So you're going to start with beans, then you're going to dry the beans, roast the beans, and then finally either deliver them to your warehouse or to coffee shops that are looking for certain types of beans. And it has this very interesting thing where you're laying these cards over top of each other. other. The whole game is basically picking a card and adding it to your little estate, your little tableau or whatnot. And the cards have 6 little squares on them, and every time you add a card to your tableau somewhere, you need to cover at least a minimum of 2 prior squares. So the whole game is building an engine, but then having to break and recreate that engine because you're having to cover up symbols that were doing something good for you in the previous rounds. So every decision you make in this game is difficult because not only which card do you want to take, what is it going to come with a shop? Are you going to be able to fulfill that order later? And because it plays in 8 rounds, it's a very tight, quick puzzle. Plays best either solo or 2 players. If you play with 3 or 4, there might be a little more downtime than you'd like. It's pretty much like there isn't much player interaction at all, other than the extent of it is basically picking a card before your opponent gets to it. Otherwise, you're pretty much all doing your own thing, but it plays quickly. The solo mode is very snappy, very enjoyable, and it's very easy to teach. So yeah, highly recommended. Probably, I would say, yeah, I guess it is the small box card game pick of the year for me. And it comes with an expansion built right in called Espresso that kind of gives you some extra options and replayability. So yeah, excellent game. That is Café. Now on to my number 8, which is Welcome to the Moon. So, what a game this is. I don't even know where to start because, well, the first thing I'll say is of all the games on my top 10, this is one of the ones I've played the least. I only tried this for the first time a few days ago. I've only played a couple of the sheets so far, but and I haven't played through it as a campaign or anything yet, but basically if you're familiar with Welcome To, which was a flip and write game where you're designing your own little neighborhood and you're filling out rows with numbers in ascending order from lowest to highest. You could get pools and parks and all these kinds of things. It's a very simple game, fairly low interaction, but one of the better roll and write / flip and writes out there, I thought. Welcome to the Moon has now come along, and this feels like it's staking its claim as this feels like it's saying to everyone out there, if you're going to buy just one roll and write game, this is the one to get. And the reason why is because it preserves what Welcome To had to an extent with the ascending numbers from left to right, and there's a lot of similarities that make it somewhat easy to get into if you're familiar with Welcome To. But there are 8 different sheets in here, and they're actually dry erase boards instead, and they come with markers, so you don't have to get things laminated or run out of sheets, so that's already a huge plus. But there's 8 different adventures that have their own set of rules, and they all kind of progress, and they're all space themed in different ways. The first one, you're launching a rocket. And then there's other ones where you're actually, it shows you leaving Earth and going in further into space. There's, I think, one that's on a spaceship. There's one that's on a different planet. I can't remember which planet it is. You're basically going through. You can play these as standalone adventures, or you can play it as a campaign mode. And the interesting thing about the campaign is that even the campaign is highly replayable and different every time, because the campaign is you're gonna read a little bit of story, and then it's gonna ask you for an option sort of thematically within the story. It's not gonna ask you, you're not gonna know what it means for the gameplay yet, but based on what option you pick, it's gonna tell you in this big campaign book, go to page 58 or go to page 42 or whatnot, and you'll read along and it'll tell you which cards, which goals to use in conjunction with that game. I can't wait to explore this further. This is one that I felt almost odd leaving it into my top 10 because of how little I've had to play it so far, but seeing what it had to offer, and I read through the rules for almost all the other adventures, and as I was reading through, I could just tell right away how much I'm going to love this game and love playing through the campaign. You can play it solo, you can play it with other people. This one only goes up to 6 because of the fact that they're dry erase boards, so it doesn't have the, play up to 100 like Welcome To did. But yeah, what a game, and the value in the box is incredible. There's a couple extra boxes that say don't open them yet. There's spoilers. I didn't expect all this stuff to come in the box when I bought this game. I'm already very pleasantly surprised with this, and it still plays very quickly. So yeah, there's going to be a bit more of a barrier with learning all the sheets, and then if you're trying to play one and play the other, you might forget the rules. But I mean, the value here is kind of unmatched, especially for a roll and write / flip and write game. So can't wait to explore this more, and I will definitely be covering this in the channel in detail once I've had a chance to play through the campaign at least once, maybe twice. So yeah, Welcome to the Moon, fantastic game, and could be the pinnacle of the kind of roll and write genre now. Number 7, which might come, I'm just going to take a quick break here because some of you who watch the channel a lot might be surprised that this is at number 7. I asked Dylan before filming, and I think he thought this was going to be higher, and I think other people might be getting the same impression, and I'll explain why this is sort of only at number 7, but that is Cascadia. So Cascadia is a fantastic game that, if I was just rating the game objectively, would probably be higher than this because of how many people would like this game, how many people already do like this game, how many different situations it can fit into, how easy it is to play. It's always a guaranteed sort of good time. It's just a reliable, very well-refined, well-polished game. I did a full review on this and talked about, because I know a lot of people criticize the randomness in this game, and in my opinion, the randomness is spot on. It's the perfect level of randomness in here for this type of game. It's a fairly low interaction tile laying game where you're each building your own kind of little habitat, but the main conceit of the game is that you're having to draft a pair of a land tile, or a landscape or habitat tile with a animal tile, or the token, and you're going to be adding the tile somewhere to your terrain, and then you have to put the animal token on one of the spots in your terrain where it has the matching symbol. You're basically playing 20 turns of that, going around the table, and you're scoring for a variety of conditions. Each of the animals scores differently, but each of those animals has a set of cards that you can mix in from the box for a lot of added replayability and stuff like that. So the reason why this isn't any higher is just that the games that tended to beat it out, and when you see the games that come after this, my absolute favorite games usually tend to be games that are very interactive, where you're playing the player more than you're playing the game. That's not always the case. There's a lot, I'm not against that whole multiplayer solitaire thing, and I don't even consider this necessarily multiplayer solitaire, because there is a little more to watch out for with what your opponents are doing, especially if you're playing against good players. So I want to be careful. I don't want to say that this is a no interaction game or anything like that. It's just, that is why it's sort of only at number 7. I think it's an excellent game. I don't think it's ever going to leave my collection. It's going to be one of the games I bring out places a lot, just because of how, again, the guaranteed good time and the sort of streamlined rule set. One of the better tile laying games out there. I think it's a really, really good game for the hobby in general. After I played it a decent amount of times and I kept playing some of these other titles throughout the year, I started realizing that it wasn't going to be, I thought it was going to be in my top 5. It was one of my most anticipated games of the year, and I really, really do enjoy Cascadia, but there were some other special games that just got ahead of it kind of at the end of the year for me. So if you haven't tried it yet, I highly recommend you do. It's a great solo, great with any player count. You really can't go wrong. Yeah, that's Cascadia. All right, on to my number 6, and this is one that really surprised me. That is Sheepy Time. And full disclosure, I've only played Sheepy Time once. And you might be wondering, how is this game that you've played once 6th on your list out of 68 games that you played this year or whatever? And keep in mind, some of those games, if you go back and watch the tier list, don't belong quite on the list because of reprints and editions and second editions, that kind of thing. But man, what a game this is. Push Your Luck game, designed by Neil Kimball, first-time designer, published by AEG. I apologize, I didn't mention the designers and publishers the last couple games, but you can look those up. Sheepy Time is a really interesting kind of push your luck game, and this is one that I think we had a chance to get a review copy before, I had heard much about the game. Actually, when I heard about it was being offered a review copy, and I remember taking a look at this and thinking, normally we like to be open-minded for first-time designers. We like games from AEG typically. But there was something about the artwork and the Push Your Luck. Oh, it's a game about a sheep running from a nightmare, trying to get sleep. And I was like, I don't know. There's something about it to me. It seemed too much like a kid's game. I thought, even if it's a good game, I'm probably not going to enjoy it much. Boy, was I wrong. Thanks to, I believe it was Space Biff review, as well as our friends Jeff and Jamie at Foster the Meeple, who champion this game all the time. Thank you, Jeff and Jamie. By the way, go check out their channel and subscribe to them if you haven't yet. But Sheepy Time is great. It's a push your luck game where, you're trying to run around this track and hop the fence. And there's a nightmare that's chasing you and your fellow players that play as sheep. And every time you hop the fence, you're going to be given an option to either stop pushing your luck and call it a night, which basically means you're out of the round, but you're safe and you're going to lock in a certain number of points. Or you can choose, once you hop that fence, to basically go another round. I don't remember what it's called, but push, basically. What that means is now you're not going to be given that choice again unless you successfully make it all the way around the track again and go over the fence again. If the nightmare comes in contact with you before you make it around, you basically lose all your progress. You get nothing for the round pretty much. So there's this very interesting decision, because you're also taking turns. Like a lot of push your luck games, there's things like Ink and Gold that are more simultaneous. This does push your luck in a way where you get to see what the other players do. If someone stops and you know where they are on the point track or how close to victory or not, it changes the dynamic of how much you do or don't want to push your luck. And the cool thing is that it's such a simple game, because on your turn you have 2 cards in your hand and you're picking one of those 2 cards to play. And so you basically, it's a 50-50 option, but even those cards within them have other options that give you some more decision space. Like, where do you want to play this card? What exactly do you want to use it on? Do you want to save this one for maybe next turn, play the other card instead? So makes your turn simple. You just pick one of your 2 cards, but then you use the card. And what it does is make it a simple rule set too, because all the complexity, all the things that make this game interesting are on the cards, as well as the dream tiles that go around the board. And as you're going around the board, you can have these little, some of the cards let you put these Z tokens, Z's for sleep tokens, I guess, on dream tiles, which means that when you land on them, you can remove a token to activate the ability. There's a box full of all these abilities, so the game is this kind of like shifting puzzle every time you set it up of which nightmares they're going to be out there, which, by the way, so far there's only 3 in the box. That's something I wish there would have been more in the base game. I felt like there should have been at least 4, maybe even 5 or 6, but I'll let that slide for now. But the tiles and the card powers and everything give it some really good replayability. And the last thing I want to say about the game, I didn't want to get this into the rules, but maybe the most interesting part is when you lock in, you basically have a target goal on this game. You have 2 point trackers. You have your current points and you have your target, which is your pillow. Your pillow is basically telling you how much sleep you need to get to win the game. And when you actually call it a night and you're successfully safe at the end of the round, when you compare out of all the players who are safe, you get a different number. You get to move your pillow lower down on the track to basically make it so you have a lower target of points. So maybe I needed 40 points to win, but now that I've moved this pillow down because I did better than everyone this round, now my target to win the game is only maybe 32 points. The other players might still need 35 or 40 or whatnot. So the sliding scale of the moving target for winning the game adds this other like kind of interesting element of you don't know when your opponent's going to push or not. The game we did play, we had someone push and stop and they thought they were safe and they thought they were going to win, and then the last player left just said, I got to keep pushing, and they pushed and pushed, and they did get kind of lucky, but they ended up coming back and winning, and it was fascinating. Anyway, I've only tried this as a 3-player game so far. I got to try it with 4. I don't think it would be as ideal with 2. There is a solo mode. I don't really know if the game's going to shine there, but this might be my new favorite push your luck game, or game where push your luck is the main thing going on. And if not favorite, no, who am I kidding? It's not my favorite, but it's getting up there. Sheepy Time, we'll definitely talk about this more on the channel once we've had a chance to play it more. Okay, now we are getting into the top 5, and here there was a bit of no, I would say this one I kind of went back and forth between this and Sheepy Time for the 5th and 6th slot, so the jump tends to happen a little higher up on the list. But this is number 5. This is Trick Shot. This is a co-designed game by, I always forget the first designer's name, Nikita Krylov and Artem Nichiporov, and this is published by Wolf Designer. They are known for Guards of Atlantis and Guards of Atlantis 2, which just came out not too long ago. But this is a tabletop hockey game. I never thought I would see something designed to replicate hockey this accurately. And for those of you who do know or might not know, like, I am Canadian, there's a bit of bias here. I do love watching hockey, going skating, things like that. So there's maybe a tiny little bit of bias, but this game like recreated the feeling of hockey way more faithfully than I ever thought would have been possible. It's an absolutely brilliant design because there's basically only 2 or 3 small things that feel like they're very different from hockey, which I understand why they made these choices for gameplay purposes. Things like you can't ice the puck. There's no icings, and I think face-offs will only ever happen at center ice. There's no face-offs in like the corner circles or whatnot. But other than that, it pretty faithfully recreates a lot of what you're doing and gives you that similar feel. And it's kind of a coincidence that it follows Sheepy Time, which I was just talking about as a push your luck game, because the main conceit of this game is push your luck. You have a pool of dice, so you start off on your turn and you're going to roll 1 die. You're going to pick an action with one of your characters, and you have your center, your 2 wingers, your 2 defensemen, and your goalie. And what you do is you roll 1 die, and you have different symbols on the dice, and you can have, if an X comes up, you are going to basically bust, you fail. But you have these stamina tokens, which are your sort of represent your line changes on the bench. And anytime you sort of bust or fail a roll, you can say, I'm going to use a stamina token. You flip it over, and it means your guys are now, one of your lines on the bench is exhausted, but you get to re-roll and try again. And as long as you're not getting a bust or a fail, you get to keep pushing. And you keep taking as many actions as you want on your turn. Technically, you could take 50 actions in a row as long as you don't bust. But every time you take an action, you have to add 1 more die to the pool than last time. So your first action, you're rolling 1 die. Probably going to be successful. Then you roll 2 dice for your next action. Then you choose, do I want to go again or do I want to stop? Yeah, maybe I'll roll a third. third, 3 dice, 4 dice, suddenly there's way more X's coming up. And if you bust, the penalties are rough because you just lose your turn, you don't get to refresh your stamina as far as I remember, and then your opponent suddenly now is starting with 1 die and they might be in a better position than you. So this game is incredible. I've only played the base game so far, and in the box there's like arena cards where you can set up a specific kind of, you can play in one of the actual NHL arenas. They have my very own Winnipeg Jets in here, which brought a huge smile to my face. And then each player can pick these cards. There's line change cards that give you abilities throughout the game, which basically tells you, like, if you're playing as Winnipeg, you put these cards in your deck, and if this player is playing as, you know, Edmonton, they have these cards in their deck, so you kind of have an idea of what that team's play style is that's built into the game, and you're playing those cards throughout the game that are going to allow you to it's an amazing game. Really enjoy this one. It's not something that I'm going to play all the time, and I know it's kind of situational in terms of who is going to come over to my place who actually wants to play this. I think you can play up to 3 or 4 players, but to me, I look at this as a 2-player only game. But yeah, it plays quickly. The turns are fast. It's very engaging the whole way. Highly recommend Trick Shot, and this is another one. I know I've said this a lot, but we'll definitely cover this on the channel with a full review at some point because more people need to experience this game and know about it. It's very, very well done. Trick Shot. Okay, so these 4 here, this is where I would say there was a pretty significant jump. These 4 games that are left, at one point or another, each of I had these in as my number 1 game of the year at different points, and I was waffling, kind of swapping them back and forth. Even as early as today, before filming this video, I was still on the fence about these 4. So yes, I have ranked them, but this does show you kind of how close together these are, and this would almost be its own tier for the year. I really do think these are kind of a level above the games I've talked about. So the first one here, number 4, is Hallertau. This is a pretty big box Uwe Rosenberg game. It's not his most complex by any means. The box just looks very big, a lot of components and stuff like that. But this is a game that probably plays best either, I would say probably as a 2-player game. I've played it solo a couple times. The solo mode is very good as well. I think with 3 or 4 players, you might have a little more downtime than you'd like, just because of how kind of thinky it is, and it's very much a game of optimization and efficiency. So it is a kind of classic Uwe Rosenberg farming game, but what I really appreciate, the fact that he stuck with farming, but he did beer. Hallertau is the region of beer, region in Germany that produces the most hops, I believe. And so this is a game about beer production, but it doesn't really feel like it as much when you're playing. You've got this, it's going to sound ridiculous, but you've got this community center building on your little board, and there's a window on the community center that has a number revealed, and that shows you how many workers you're going to have at the start of the round. Throughout the game, you're going to be gathering resources and doing things to try and move this community center and get it pushed along the board, which is going to reveal a higher and higher number, allowing you more workers every round. But how do you push the community center? Well, there's these 5 buildings that are next to it, and in order to be able to push the community center to the side, you first need to push the buildings by upgrading them, and you have to pay different types of goods in different combinations. There's different restrictions on these buildings, but the more you push them, the more you can move this community center over, and then you kind of ramp up and start to get more workers, so you have more productive rounds, and you can do bigger actions. The actual worker placement is very interesting too, because the spaces have spots for either 1, 2, or 3 workers, and everyone shares the same worker pieces. They're just blue cubes, so you can go to any spot that has an opening, but if there's already 1 cube there, then you have to pay 2 cubes the next time, or 2 workers. And then if there's already the last person who went there paid 2 workers, you have to spend 3 workers, and that's the max. So the actions are there, but it's this decision of, do I want to wait until maybe those workers get removed in a future round and I can maybe get that action for only 1 worker next round, or do I just take it for 2 or 3 workers now? There's certain things that you can get in multiple places on the board, and there's other things that you can only get in 1 or 2 spots. So sometimes you really have to cut your losses and say, sure, I'll spend the extra worker and just take that thing while I can get it. But the best thing about this game is the cards, and something that Uwe Rosenberg hasn't done in any of his other games yet is this free-flowing card system where you play cards on any time. You don't have to take an action like in Agricola. There's no action space to play cards. It doesn't even have to be your turn. There's no specific phase. You can literally, someone's doing something on the turn, playing, I'm up doing this phase. You're like, sorry, I'm going to just play this card real quick. You just play cards when you want, and they chain into other cards. A lot of cards say draw another card. There's these 4 different decks on the board, so I feel like I'm getting too into the mechanics of the game already, more than I would like, but the point is just to illustrate that, we've seen a lot of Uwe Rosenberg in the past however many years has done a lot where he takes an idea from one game and does another sort of similar game. We saw it with his Polyomino titles. We saw it with Nova Luna going into Sagani and then into Framework, where he takes one idea and kind of does a few versions of it and iterates on it. This, to me, feels like its own completely different beast, which is the most impressive part about this and what makes it stand out. I worried that it was going to be another Uwe Rosenberg farming game kind of thing, but the card play being very different, the way the worker placement's done, the way sheep are implemented in the game, the fact that they don't even breed, and like the whole breeding thing is not the way it's done in Uwe Rosenberg games, and the value, how valuable the sheep are. You've got an interesting system with these fallow fields moving around and getting more valuable for you. It's its own game, its own puzzle. It's never going to measure up to, you know, his absolute best games like Agricola for me or anything like that. But it's a very solid game, one that I'm really happy that I went and bought my own copy of to have in my collection. Just because even to play a couple times a year solo or whatnot, it's so satisfying exploring the different card combinations and that comboing. And there's a lot of randomness in that. You might draw cards that don't help you, and a lot of people have complained about that. But personally, I love, love, love games where there's a rich deck or multiple decks of cards to explore. So yeah, without the deck of cards, this might not even have been on the list for me, but that's what puts it over the top because the core puzzle tends to remain fairly similar from game to game, but it's the cards that really set things apart. But yeah, fascinating game, and plays in a really reasonable amount of time. When I played solo recently, I played it, I think it took just over an hour, and I was kind of refreshing on some rules. So yeah, very, very good game, Hallertau. Dylan had it quite high on his top 10 of 2021 as well. So now we're getting into the top 3. Even more parity here. These were really, really tough to decide between. Even now, I'm kind of wondering if I'm making choices that I might regret, but so be it. Number 3 is Fayum. This is designed by Friedemann Friese, who's most well known for Power Grid. And this is published by 2F Spiel, and in North America it was Rio Grande. So this is it's 1 to 5 players. I would say I've only played it with 3 players so far. I wouldn't want to even play it with less than 3 unless I was just trying it out, experimenting, maybe play the solo version just to try out some stuff at home. But for the most part, this is going to be a game that I'm only going to be pushing really to play with 4 or 5 players, because as good as it was with 3, I could see it being much better with 4 or 5 players. So, and I've talked about this game on the channel before. We've done I covered it actually in a fairly recent Own It, Play It, or Skip It video. So if you want to see a more full review, feel free to go check that out. But the basic idea is it's the region of Fayum in Egypt, and you are competing with your fellow opponents to try and gain the favor of the pharaoh. So you're basically going to be gaining you each start with the same sort of set of cards. And this game is very similar to things like something like Concordia or Century Golem, in the sense that you play a card and it does what it says, or you spend an action taking back all of your cards that you've played. So it's this cycling game of trying to decide, when do I want to do I want to keep playing cards and play as many as I can? Because when you take that rest action, or in this game it's called administration, that's basically your whole turn, and you can only take back the top 3 cards in your discard pile unless you spend an extra $1 for every subsequent card. So even the order you play the card and which ones you decide to bury at the bottom and play early, so you don't have to get them back and pay for them later. There's this whole efficiency thing. You're getting cards from the market in a similar way as in Power Grid. But the cool thing is that on this shared map, you're building everything together. Anytime someone builds something on the map, it belongs to the pharaoh. It doesn't belong to any player. Nothing is coded to any player colors because everything belongs to the pharaoh, but your cards piggyback off of the way that the land develops. And there's a quick little side tangent right now, just because this applies to all 3 of these games that are in here. And if you watch this channel a lot, you've heard me probably talk about, I realize more and more over time how much I love games that have a shared interactive map where players are fighting over something, fighting over positioning, whatnot, whether it's tile laying, and a map that evolves, and something where you have to make tactical decisions along the way to adapt and change what you're doing. I've been playing lately some of the old classics that do this very well, like Tigris and Euphrates and Hansa Teutonica, and this is nothing like those games, but it gives you that aspect of, right from the start, you're looking at the board, you're looking at your cards, but every single turn that happens, every card that gets bought from the market, you're watching to say, okay, that player bought a card that's going to build a lot of workshops. So what can I do to make use of those workshops? Or they're using these cards to get a lot of workers. Well, what can I do with their workers that are on the map now? And you're always trying to shift, and people see your combo, your synergy, that you're running this engine. You play these 3 or 4 cards in a row and you pick them back up, and people see you running away with points. So maybe they stop putting the things on the map that you can use to generate those points. So now you got to find a new way to find a new combo somewhere else. It has a very interesting end game condition too. I won't get into any of the more of the rules. Just go check out our review if you want to know more about the game. But it's a fascinating game. I haven't played anything quite like this. And it's just something that I'm thinking about a lot. I can't wait to get back to the table. Friedemann Friese has these really, really, really interesting designs. I don't know how it's going to hold up over time. I don't know if it's something that after, 10, 15, 20 plays, maybe I'll eventually tire of. I don't know. But currently I'm in a phase where I'm just kind of in love with what this game does with the cards, and I just want to explore those cards and the combos a lot more. Again, I was talking about the cards with Hallertau, and it's got a similar thing going there, but with the shared map. It's a very interactive game. So yeah, Fayum, excellent game. I just wish it was a bit shorter. Both times I've played it, I think it has gone slightly over the 2-hour mark, but 3 of us were new the first time playing. That was my number 3 game of the year. So on to the final 2. Number 2, Winter Kingdom. This was a tricky one to place on the list because we haven't covered this in a full review yet, and I've only played it twice so far, and I know that I'm nowhere near my optimal enjoyment of this game so far. If I was ranking this based on just how my first 2 experiences with the game went, I would probably be putting this lower. But what has this up at number 2 is that when I think about the things that got in the way and what prevented me from enjoying the experience more in those 2 plays were the rule book is very poor, so it made learning the game for the first time difficult. And then there's also, you have to go online and check an FAQ for a bunch of clarifying questions, like the designer himself, Donald X. Vaccarino, who did Kingdom Builder, as well as Dominion. There's a thread online where he himself admits that the rulebook is not very good and to follow the FAQ that he links to. So if you're ever going to check this game out, look into that first. But so Kingdom Builder is kind of an old favorite of mine and Dylan's, abstract game where you have to put these 3 little settlements on the map on your turn. You flip a card, it tells you where you can go. You put 3 settlements down, but the main conceit of the game, the hook of the game is if you can play adjacent to a previous piece, you have to. So if the terrain type that you've revealed, if there's any of that terrain that's adjacent somewhere to a previous piece that you have to play next to a previous piece. If not, then you can go anywhere on the map on that terrain. So I'm going to try not to do too much of the Kingdom Builder and Winter Kingdom comparisons because first off, Kingdom Builder I've played almost 100 times and Winter Kingdom I've only played twice, and because we're going to be doing a full comparison video on both of these games once we play this a lot more. But other than, the rule set and how many things there were to wrap your head around, there's a lot more going on in Winter Kingdom than in Kingdom Builder, so I felt like I was swimming in a sea of options and kind of drowning in terms of what do I do and how do I take advantage of this card ability? And it felt like there was a lot, the decision space is massive. Of any game in my top 10, I would say this is the most analysis paralysis inducing game for sure. So if you play with people who take a really long time on their turns, or you don't like games with a lot of downtime, or you're sitting there plotting and people are all kind of quiet in their own head trying to figure out what to do, then this might not be up your alley. But if you like these kind of tactical games where positioning matters and you've got different goals every game, and this thing does so many things, it improves on a lot of the issues I had with Kingdom Builder that made me feel like Kingdom Builder, it's still a game I'll always be happy to play and I'll never quite grow tired of it, but I got to a point with Kingdom Builder where some of the setups sometimes, even when you just see the original or the initial game setup at the start, I would say, oh, that's a combination of powers or of whatever that I know is not going to be as interesting. There were certain scoring condition cards that made the game a little more tedious. So it's just every, 2 out of every 10 Kingdom Builder games I played ended up feeling kind of disappointing, like it wasn't quite what I was hoping for. Winter Kingdom gives you more of that flexibility. It gives you more freedom to do what you want, but because of that, it's a larger decision space. There's way more options, and it's a bigger map. There's way more spaces, so it's a bit less, you're blocking your opponents less. There's a bit less there's a bit more space to get around and do what you want. But to me, this has a ton of room for those clever plays of spotting something that you might be the only person at the table when you make a certain move. Everyone else might go, oh, wow, I would have never thought you could do that, or I never saw that move. There's so much creativity you can do with the different abilities and the tunnels in the game where you can go around the map. You're using area control around the castles rather than just putting a piece next to it. I just feel this improves on Kingdom Builder in almost every way. I just know that it's going to be a slog to get to the point where I'm no longer having to try and remember the rules and I'm just able to focus on the strategy and what I'm doing. But it's hard to come up with many complaints for this game other than that rule book. and just that kind of like overwhelming first few plays. But yeah, can't wait to find whether it's Dylan, if he decides that he wants to continue exploring this with me, or whoever else. I'm going to be playing a lot of this game, but I will say I don't think this one I will enjoy playing with 4 players as much as Kingdom Builder because of all that extra stuff to consider. I think the downtime will be pretty high with 4 players. And with a bigger map, it means it's going to be more open. So I think 3 players is probably going to be the sweet spot for this game. But anyway, once we do play it a bunch more, we'll absolutely do an in-depth review covering this, comparing it to Kingdom Builder on the channel, because Dylan and I both really enjoy Kingdom Builder. And yeah, I guess I really enjoy this one as well, even more than Kingdom Builder so far. That is Winter Kingdom. And finally, my game of the year for 2021, which I guarantee is going to come as a surprise because I don't think I've seen anyone else call it their game of the year. I hesitated for a while. I kept thinking, can this be a game of the year? Is this too simple of a game? Is this too much of a small box game? Like, what are people going to think if they see that I put this above 67 other games? People can be like, how did you rate this above this? Whatever. But the more I thought about it, I don't really care, because it's true to, honestly, the game that surprised me most this year and the game that I enjoy the most, and that is Great Plains. This game, and honestly, it's my most played game of the year for sure, and obviously there's a bit of a bias towards that because it's a game you can play in 20 minutes, but also there's still things I haven't seen in this game that I want to try doing that I haven't been able to. The game has felt different every time, the way the map is laid out and everything. It's just a phenomenal game, and when I think of all these other games, and I think how many plays I'm going to get out of these, or how long I'll be playing these in my life, like, this one is sticking around forever for me, I think. So this is a 2-player only game. It plays, like I said, in about 20 minutes. Co-designed by Trevor Benjamin and Brett J. Gilbert. And this is part of that Lookout Games 2-player line that has a bunch of really great games like Mandala and so on. So this shares a lot of DNA with games like Go, Blue Lagoon, and Fjords, if you're familiar with any of those. So it's got that similar kind of hex-based sort of area control thing where you're trying to split up and take over different portions of the map. You start off there's kind of a little setup thing at the beginning of the game, which is sort of like the first phase of the game, where you each put out these cave tiles on these maps. It's a modular board. You flip these tiles over, set up a random map, and you put out, each player gets to place 3 of their caves on the map, taking turns, and then the actual game starts. And you each have 20 pieces, so you get 20 turns, and on your turn, you're basically just placing one of your pieces. You're either the foxes or the snakes. You're placing it on the board either next to one of your 3 caves or next to one of your previous pieces, a fox or a snake. And you're just going back and forth, taking turns, placing pieces adjacently until the game ends. There's one way to score points, and there's these little meadows that's the only place you can get points, and every meadow is going to be worth a certain number of points based on the number of spaces it has. And you're basically just doing an area majority battle. So whether I have 5, foxes to your 1 snake there, or it's 4-2 or 3-1 or whatever, it doesn't matter. Whoever has the majority gets the full points. And you're just trying to see, the whole game is basically goes back to what I was talking about with some of these other games like Winter Kingdom and Fayum, where you survey a map, you look at the setup, you make a plan, you come up with a strategy, and then everything goes out the window based on what your opponent is constantly doing. It's a tug of war, push and pull, where you're pushing the other opponent somewhere you're either putting pressure to say, I'm going to start moving towards this really high, this one meadow is the most valuable one in the game based on this current setup. It's going to be worth 9 points. I got to fight for that one. So maybe I start making a play, and then I see my opponent overcommit over a few turns. They put 5 pieces in there, and I only have 2. Well, maybe now I think instead of me trying to win that back by spending however many turns, I got them to overcommit. They have 5 pieces in there now. They could have won that with 3 or 4. Now I'll go somewhere else, and I'll try to go for this other, branch out and take control of these other meadows. But the cool thing is the spots that you can move on the map, there's just there's the meadows where you want to end up just to score those points. There's mountains which you can't step on, but you can actually fly over, which I'll explain in a second. Or there's spots that you step on that have these animal powers, and this is what breaks the game wide open and makes it really interesting, is that there's a horse, a bear, and an eagle. The horse basically lets you move 2 spots. You can go through your own guys or opponents' pieces. The eagle lets you fly over mountains, and the bear lets you push an opponent's piece even into like a mountain, crushing them or knocking them off the side of the map. So if you land on a piece, you get the animal token, but until you actually use it, that turn did nothing for you. Getting the animal token in your possession just deprives your opponent from getting it, because there's only 3 of each of these animal tokens available. So when I was talking earlier about trying things that I wanted to try, stuff I haven't been able to try yet. I want to try a game where right off the bat I go grab 3 bear tokens before my opponent can get any, and then I just hold them. And now my opponent can't use bears at all that whole game. There's just the way the map is laid out and the way that you have these kind of pressure points and deciding where to cut your losses, where to give up, where to place a piece to try and make your opponent think that you're going to play for something. That tempo is kind of always up for grabs. There's always a play to be made, even if you feel like you're behind. It's just an incredible game, and the fact that it's a 3 or 4 page rule set, I think I said this in a previous video, but I think it would have been easy for, I think most designers or even developers, whoever was working with the company, whether it was design team developers, it would have been easy to just sort of say, but let's add more powers and let's make the horses and the snakes and the foxes, let's make them asymmetric, and let's add in a variant where you can play with 3 players or 4 players and all this stuff. And like, I have so much respect for whether it's the designers who deserve the credit or the development team from Lookout, when they're able to say, no, the game is perfect as is, it doesn't need any more bells and whistles, you don't need new things, you don't need cards, you don't need these other, it's just, the rules get out of the way and all the decision space is just there for you to explore. And it feels like, of any game I played this year, the ratio of depth of strategy and depth of the kind of tactical decision space for the simplicity of rules, no game matched this. And that's why it's the #1 game for me, because everyone I've shown it to has loved it. You can play like 3 games of this in 40, 45 minutes. This is a keeper. It's going to stick around for a long time. And yeah, I just absolutely love Great Plains. I think it's something that will appeal to a lot of different people. And I could gush about this game all day, but I will leave it at that. My #1 game of the year, Great Plains. So that's it. Those are my top 10 games of 2021. Again, if you missed the previous video where I talked about the other 58 games that didn't make my top 10, feel free to go check that out. It might provide some extra context for you to see, which games it stood out above. Or again, you might be thinking, well, if Great Plains was #1, he must not have played this game. Chances are I did play that game. Go back and check. Hopefully this video puts things in perspective along with that tier ranking list. I'm curious to hear what made your list for top games of 2021. What was your, feel free to share your top 10 or top 5 or top 1, whatever you want to share, but I'm curious, and are any of these games that surprised you seeing them on the list or something that now you want to try based on hearing me talk about them? Always looking to have some interesting discussions with you all in the comments. So thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.